He kept his mouth shut because reality was uglier than their rumors. 4 years, $84,000 handed to a property company, and a credit card quietly bleeding him at 24% behind a doorman who took his packages in. On paper, he was a success story. In reality, he was drowning quietly in front of a $1 million view. The truck they rented was far too big for what Emmett still owned. That was the first thing his friend Marcus noticed, standing in the empty living room on the 19th floor, with a roll of packing tape in his hand. Emmett had sold the couch, the bed frame, the dining set, and almost everything that would not fit downstairs. 4 years in that apartment, and what remained of his life fit in 11 boxes and a mattress. Marcus and 4 guys from Emmett's floor at work loaded it in under an hour. The drive over was dead silent. When we parked in front of that run-down brick box, things just got weirder. "This is it?" Marcus asked. "This is it." Marcus set the box down on the step and didn't let go of it. "Okay, I'm gonna ask, and you can tell me to shut up. How bad is it?" "How bad is what?" You still have your job. You got a raise in March, you bought me dinner with it, and now you're moving into a basement." He looked at the door. "Is it cards? Sports? Somebody take you for something?" Nobody had asked a question and stayed with it long enough to hear the answer. In 4 weeks, concern had hardened into a story. He was 31 years old, carrying his own mattress down a half-flight of concrete steps into a unit that got about 90 minutes of real daylight a day, and the nicest explanation the people who loved him could come up with was that he had bet everything away on a phone app. He tried, once. He said, "I'm not in trouble. I'm cutting my rent in half on purpose." Marcus nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone who's clearly lying about something and you've decided to let them keep it. "Sure, man. Whatever you need." Emmett carried the last box down, shook a few hands, and shut the door on the smell of primer and floor cleaner. Then he sat on the bare floor, with his back against the wall, and opened his banking app, and there it was, $940 a month that wasn't going out the door anymore. He stayed down there until his back started aching against the wall, then walked out and got a burrito, because the box with his plates was pinned behind the mattress, and he could not face unpacking either one yet. To understand what he walked away from, you have to understand what he walked into 4 years earlier. Emmett had started on the shop floor of an architectural metalwork company when he was 22, learning how stairs, railings, and custom fixtures were actually built. At 27, he was promoted into the drafting department. 3 weeks later, he signed a lease at the Ardmore. Glass lobby, a doorman named Reggie, who remembered everybody's dog, a gym on the 2nd floor that Emmett used maybe 11 times total. Back then, the extra money from the promotion still felt like it would go on forever. The rent was $1,600 the first year, $1,680 the second, $1,750 the third, and $1,890 in his final year. He never fought a single increase. When the renewal letter slid under his door, he would feel a little punch in his chest and then sign it, because moving was exhausting, and because the apartment had become part of how he described himself. Friends came over and said the view was unbelievable. Emmett stopped looking at it somewhere around month 5. It was just a window he walked past on his way to bed, and after a while he hung a jacket on the chair in front of it and left it there for most of a winter. Here's the part he didn't tell anyone, including himself, for about 2 years. $1,600 was pushing it. By the time it hit $1,890, he was functionally broke before the month even started. Not dramatically. Most months he was short by $150, maybe $200, small enough that he could look at the account on the 4th and call it a weird month. Groceries went on the card in the 3rd week. then the dentist, then the flight to a wedding he could not skip. He would pay a chunk off in a good month and watch it climb back in a bad one, until the balance settled around $6,800 and simply lived there. At 24% interest, it was taking well over $100 from him every month at the start, before he had bought food or filled the tank. You do not decide rent every month. It goes out the way the power bill goes out, and you build the rest of your life from whatever is still sitting in the account on the 4th. Emmett was not reckless. He did not have a shopping problem or a car payment he could not justify. The apartment did not consume his entire paycheck. The rent just ate everything else. Groceries, gas, copays, all of it ended up on plastic, because the walls demanded their cut first. Nobody could see that from the sidewalk, because there was a man in the lobby who took his packages in. It was a Tuesday in February, nothing special about it until around 10 o'clock. His laptop was on the counter, the radiator was making that clicking sound it always made, and he was doing something he had avoided for 4 years. He opened a blank spreadsheet and typed in every fixed cost he had. Rent was the first line, and it was bigger than the next 4 put together. Then he listed what he had paid each year and added it up. The total was $83,040. He ran the calculation twice, because the first answer looked like a typing mistake. Just over $83,000 in rent alone, before utilities, for a place to sleep. He said the number out loud in the empty kitchen, which he never did. $83,000. His savings account had $4,100 in it. His card had $6,800 on it. Outside the retirement account he could not touch without penalties and taxes, his accessible money put him $2,700 below zero. 4 years of grinding, and he had exactly 0 assets. No house, no side hustle, not even a new certificate to show for it. The view outside was doing its thing, orange streetlight and slow traffic on the bridge, and he honestly could not remember the last time he'd stood there on purpose. "What am I even buying?" he said to nobody. 3 weeks later, Emmett got a raise, which should have helped, 6%, effective immediately, and he took Marcus out for dinner to celebrate. On the walk home, he started doing the math in his head. By the corner of 9th, he had stopped dead on the sidewalk, with the taste of the beer still in his mouth. His lease ended at the end of April. The building had raised the rent by roughly 5% every year without fail. After tax, the raise would add only slightly more to his paycheck than the likely increase would take away. 11 months of work, and most of the improvement was already spoken for. Then in March, his sister Delia called. She'd been having pain under her ribs for weeks, worse after anything fried, and the specialist wanted an ultrasound that her insurance was arguing about. $1,200 up front, if she wanted it that month instead of in July. "It's fine," she said. "I'll wait. It's probably nothing." "Don't wait. I'll cover it." There was a pause on the line, long enough that he could hear her kids arguing about something in another room. Delia knew him well enough to hear the wobble in his voice. Can you?" He was already looking at his balance while she was still talking. 4,100 minus 1,200. And the honest thing to admit is that his thumb hovered over the credit card for a second first, because that was what the last 2 years had trained it to do. He used the savings instead, 2,900 left. Then he sat on the stool with cold hands, working out what would happen if the front tire finally gave out, the one that had been showing a strip of wear since Christmas. A replacement would cost around $400. He had the cash, technically, but spending it meant chipping away at the flimsy wall, keeping him out of credit card debt. A man paying $1,900 a month for a Skyline, doing tire math at 11 at night. The ultrasound came back 3 weeks later. Gallstones. Not an emergency, the doctor said. An elective surgery, something to schedule when it suited her. Delia heard elective and stopped listening to the rest of the sentence. She packed orders at a medical supply warehouse. $9 an hour above minimum. No paid sick leave past 3 days. 3 weeks off work was a number she couldn't make work, so she cut out anything fried and got on with it. Emmett kept catching on that word for weeks afterward. His sister had something wrong inside her, and it was going to sit there, in a family where everybody worked 6 days. The renewal letter arrived in the middle of March. Emmett let it sit on the counter for 9 days and then did not sign it. His lease ended on April 30th, leaving him a little over 5 weeks to find somewhere else. He found out quickly that nothing in his price range cared what he had gotten used to. Everything meaningfully cheaper was also meaningfully worse. Smaller rooms, older buildings, another 20 minutes from the train. Fenwick Street was the worst one he saw and the cheapest by a mile. The listing said garden level. There was no garden. 410 square feet. The kitchen was a wall. There was a water stain on the bedroom ceiling. The window in the main room looked out at the ankles of people walking past. $950 a month, all utilities included, against $1890, plus about $120 in power and internet. That was a difference of $1,060. Emmett built his plan around $940 and left the remaining $120 in his checking account as room for the things he had forgotten, underestimated, or could not predict. The landlord was a woman named Nadia who owned 3 buildings on the block and had clearly heard every complaint a human being could make about a basement. She watched him walk the unit without saying much. "You're going to tell me about the ceiling," Emmett said. "Pipe upstairs. Fixed 2 years ago. The stain is ugly, but it is dry." She pointed toward the main room. "I'm painting the walls before anyone moves in. I can do the ceiling too if you sign for a year." "If it is dry, leave it." Nadia raised an eyebrow. "Most people want the stain gone. I need cheap more than I need pretty." She studied him for a moment, then gave a short, dry laugh. "Rent is due on the 1st, she said. "Do not be late, and we will get along fine." He signed on the spot. His hands were shaking a little on the way back to the train, and somewhere around the 3rd stop, he caught himself grinning at his own reflection in the window like an idiot. The security deposit from the Ardmore arrived soon after he moved. It covered Nadia's deposit, the truck rental, and most of the new tire when the old one finally gave out. That allowed the $2,900 left after Delia's ultrasound to remain untouched. The first 7 months were harder than he let anyone see, and here is the part people get wrong when he tells it. Moving to a dump didn't make him rich overnight. Most of his paycheck still vanished instantly into auto drafts and debt payments. The remaining $120 stayed in checking as a buffer. In the months when nothing broke and no unexpected bill appeared, whatever was left of that buffer went to the card at the end of the month too. Most months, the balance fell by close to the full $1,060 he had saved by moving. On top of that, Emmett took his going-out money to zero. At 24% interest, the card was still taking well over $100 a month from him at the beginning, and he wanted the thing dead before winter. So the man who had just cut his housing cost almost in half walked around with less spending money in his pocket than he had ever carried on the 19th floor. He didn't own a proper table, so he ate on a folding one from a hardware store and told himself he'd buy a real one in the spring. He never did. Sound came through the ceiling from the family upstairs, footsteps and a kid learning to run. In August, the air down there went thick and damp, the walls sweating in the mornings, a smell of wet cardboard that never fully left. He bought a second-hand dehumidifier for $30 and emptied the tank into the sink every night before bed. The math worked, but you can't put human expectations in a spreadsheet. Marcus stopped suggesting they hang out at Emmett's place. After a while, he stopped suggesting things that cost money at all, which somehow felt worse. He started saying "my treat" with his hand already raised, before Emmett had even opened the menu. A woman Emmett had been seeing for 2 months came over once. She looked around the room with a smile that tried very hard. Their texts got thinner after that until they stopped. Emmett never knew whether it was the apartment, the money he no longer wanted to spend, or the distance he had started putting between himself and everybody else. Somewhere between concerned friends and family group chats, his move had become a money problem, then a serious money problem. By the time he reached his cousin's wedding, the story had turned into online betting. An uncle leaned in over a warm beer and asked, in a voice pitched for the whole table, whether he had gotten it sorted out yet. Gotten what sorted out? Whatever it was, nobody is judging. Happens to a lot of young guys with the betting apps now. Emmett could have corrected him in 1 sentence, but all he had to show for the decision was a basement, a card balance that had not reached 0 yet, and a plan that still sounded like an excuse when he tried to explain it. Telling the whole story would also mean turning Delia's health into conversation for a table of relatives, and she was sitting 4 chairs away with her children. So he said the rumor was more interesting than the truth, and asked somebody to pass the potatoes. The table laughed, and the moment moved on. He drove home that night, sat beneath the water stain with his shoes still on, and kept the listings app open on his phone for almost an hour without typing anything into the search bar. He closed it, finally took his shoes off, and went to bed. Month 7, the card hit 0. Emmett took a screenshot of the balance and did not send it to anybody. The weekend drafting work had started bringing in money during month 6, around $600 after tax at first. He opened an account at a different bank with no card attached and placed those early freelance payments there. He deliberately never installed the bank's app on his phone. He named the account in the system, The Way Out. When the credit card reached 0 the following month, the automatic $940 payment changed destinations and joined the freelance money in that account. That same month, the laptop died. The machine went on a Sunday night with a job half finished, and Emmett needed something that could run the drafting software. A decent replacement would cost $1,400. He could pay cash, but doing it would remove more than 1/3 of the emergency reserve he had only just managed to protect. Putting it on the card would preserve the cash, but it would reopen the balance he had spent 7 months burying. He sat at the folding table with the dead machine in front of him, listening to the child upstairs run the length of the hallway and back again. Then he called Nadia and asked whether she knew anyone who repaired or sold used computers. Her nephew did both. He had a 3-year-old business workstation that a customer had traded in and wanted $300 for. It was slow, and the fan sounded like a small aircraft, but it opened Emmett's software and held a charge. The card balance stayed at 0. That was the payoff. 3 weeks where his sister could actually heal without her whole world caving in. Month 9. The company restructured. The invite landed at 8:40 in the morning with no subject line, and the blinds in the big room were already down when he got there. 11 people lost their jobs that week. Emmett kept his, but the floor changed. People who used to argue in meetings went quiet. A designer he liked, Sophia, told him in the stairwell that she'd signed off on a plan she thought was a bad idea because she couldn't afford to be the one who said no. "How much runway do you have?" she asked him, "if it goes bad?" He had counted it that morning, actually, and the number was not impressive. $2,900 from the old savings. a little over $2,600 from 4 months of weekend drafting, 2 $940 transfers since the card had died, then $300 out for the used laptop, $7,100 and change. His entire life cost about $1,850 a month now, $950 for the basement, $400 for food, $260 for gas and insurance on a car, with 140,000 miles on it, $90 for the phone, and the rest for the student loan and small expenses that did not disappear just because he had made a spreadsheet. 4 months, he said. 5 if I stop eating out, which is mostly a sandwich place by the office, so 5. Sophia went quiet, and he watched her count something up and not like the answer. That's 4 more than me. They stood in the stairwell for a second, with that sitting between them. How? She said. I live in a basement. She laughed, and he left it there, because the real answer would have taken 20 minutes, and the meeting had already started. But he pushed back on a deadline that month that everybody else had swallowed, and it wasn't guts. It was 4 months in the bank against Sophia's rent being due on the 1st, and that sat in the room with them whether anyone said it out loud or not. Month 14, Delia called again. The pain had stopped being something she could eat around. She'd ended up in an emergency room on a Thursday night, and the surgeon told her the gallbladder had to come out within the month, elective or not. The surgery itself her insurance would mostly cover, eventually, after the deductible and the fight. That wasn't the problem. The problem was the 3 weeks before she would be cleared to return to lifting boxes at the warehouse. 3 weeks with no paycheck, $11.50 in rent due while she was recovering, then $11.50 again before she would be back to full hours. Brakes that had been grinding since October on the car she needed to get the children to school. Groceries for 2 children who did not care that their mother was scheduled for surgery. This isn't a shakedown, she said quickly. I just needed you to know. Don't do the thing where you stress out and go quiet on me. Emmett was standing in his 400-square-foot apartment with the dehumidifier humming behind him. He opened the account he never looked at. $16,340 sat in it. Delia, I'm sending you $3,000 tomorrow. It's not a loan. 2 months of rent, the breaks, and whatever's left is food. That's what it's for. It's already worked out. She started crying, which she almost never did, and told him he couldn't afford it. I can. That's the whole point. That's the only reason any of this was worth doing. He hung up and sat down on the folding chair and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes for a while. 14 months of turning down dinners, the uncle at the wedding, the woman who stopped texting, the chair that hurt his back. All of it added up to 3 weeks where Delia could lie still and nothing fell over on her kids. Then he called her back 20 minutes later to ask what kind of breaks the car took. At month 18, the number in the way out crossed $22,000. The rent difference had created roughly half of it. The weekend work had created the rest, and Delia's $3,000 had come out of the middle without breaking anything. By the end of the first year, Emmett's drafting work was bringing in closer to $900 a month after tax. Most of the early jobs were shop drawings for stairs, railings, and small custom metalwork, the same kind of work he understood from his years on the shop floor. Then one contractor asked whether Emmett could handle a small steel handrail, from measurement through fabrication, after the contractor's regular shop turned it down. Emmett rented a welding bay by the hour and built it over 2 Saturdays. He cleared $900 from that job. After that, the requests began to change. Contractors still wanted drawings, but some also wanted Emmett to take the smaller jobs from measurement to finished piece. By month 18, 2 contractors were sending him steady work, and he had started turning fabrication jobs away because he had nowhere permanent to do them. The side work was bringing in around $1,300 a month, after tax by then. He went to look at a small commercial space beyond the rail yard. It had a roll-up door, terrible lighting, and enough room for a drafting desk, a welding table, and the used tools he could afford. $600 a month. Rent, workshop, food, health insurance, car insurance, phone, student loan, and basic tools came to about $2,600 a month, with his life arranged the way it was. $22,000 covered a little over 8 months with no income at all, and 2 clients were already waiting for him. He worked out what the same decision would have looked like if he had stayed at the Ardmore, not with the $22,000 he had now. On the path he had been following before the move, he would have reached that same month with the credit card still alive and barely enough cash to cover 5 weeks. He would have been calling a recruiter before the workshop floor had been swept. He gave notice on a Wednesday. His manager asked which company had poached him and seemed almost offended by the real answer. Emmett signed the workshop lease 11 days later and hung a second-hand light bar over the bench. Marcus came by during the first week with 2 coffees. He stood in the middle of the empty floor and looked around at the roll-up door, the drafting desk, and the terrible lighting for a long moment. "So the basement thing," he said. "That is what made this possible." "Yeah." "You knew this was where you were headed?" "No." Emmett looked around the room. "I knew the way I was living was leaving me nowhere to go. This part came later." Marcus nodded slowly. "You could have told me that." "I told you I was not in trouble. On the front step." "You did. You had already decided I was lying." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at the coffee in his hand. "I should have listened longer," he said. Then he handed Emmett the cup. Emmett kept the Fenwick Street apartment for another 2 years after that, long past the point where he could have left. Nadia raised his rent $40 once and apologized for it. He never did buy the real table. He drove past the Ardmore last spring, and on an impulse he parked and went into the lobby. Reggie was still on the desk, a little grayer, and he recognized him after about 2 seconds. "Emmett, long time. You back with us?" "Just passing through." "How's the building?" "Full. Rent's $2,400 now for your old line." Emmett did the math without meaning to. Somebody was up there right now, with a renewal letter on the counter, telling themselves it's fine, quietly moving groceries onto a card, because moving apartments is exhausting. "You did all right for yourself, though," Reggie said, nodding toward the van outside with Emmett's name on the door. "That yours?" "Mine. 6 years now." "Huh. Good for you." Reggie went back to his screen. Emmett stood there a second longer than he needed to, looking at the elevator doors, then went out through the glass. The van seat was hot from the sun, and the coffee in the cup holder had gone cold 2 hours ago. He drank it anyway, pulled out into traffic, and went to the job. He tells this story now and then, usually to someone who asks why the workshop is in the worst part of town. He does not dress it up. He was moving backward every month from behind a doorman and a good view, and for a long time, he could not see it either. There was no master plan for a business back then. He was just trying to stop bleeding cash. The cheaper apartment bought him margin. Paying off the card protected that margin. The weekend work eventually showed him what he could do with it. The $940 did not build the business by itself. It gave him enough room to build one.